Over the past 10 years, there have been many riots in America, from Ferguson, Missouri to Minneapolis. However, this is not something new. Today we'll look at the 1992 LA riots, which were caused by the beating of Rodney King and the videotape that was published shortly thereafter. However, the riots were not just a cause of the videotape. It all starts back in 1980. In 1980, Ronald Reagan won the presidential election against incumbent Jimmy Carter. Reagan ran on a very tough law and order platform that promised to get rid of drugs that had plagued American inner cities for the better part of 20 years. While in president, Ronald Reagan escalated the drug war that was started under Richard Nixon. This included beefing up law enforcement in many inner cities and making harsher penalties for even possession of small drugs like marijuana. Nancy Reagan also gave her famous slogan, "Just Say No," which helped shift attitudes in black communities about the Reagan administration from that of a more positive light to more negative. After the Reagan administration, this behavior was continued by George H.W. Bush, who won the next presidential election. This contributed to increasing resentment among black communities, and Democratic presidential hopeful at the time, Bill Clinton, when asked about the LA riots, said that they were an outgrowth of the last 12 years of Republican governance. During this time, there was a rise in resentment of police officers in black communities. They saw police officers as just racist people who were carrying out the orders of a racist government that looked to put them down. These attitudes were a powder keg, and the video of Rodney King's beating helped the powder keg explode into the LA riots. In the early morning hours of March 3, 1991, Rodney King was speeding down the freeway in Los Angeles at 119 miles per hour. Once he was pulled over by police, the police started beating him with their nightsticks. Bystander Billie Holiday took out his camera and recorded the incident. It then was spread to every media outlet in the nation and was put on the front screens of every American home. There was later a trial for these officers, and in the trial, the defense attorneys argued that the police had used necessary force that they needed to subdue Rodney King. In the end, the jury found these officers not guilty and acquitted them on all charges. This led to the LA riots. I talked to my dad about the riots, who was just a junior in high school and 17 years old at the time they were happening. Here's what he had to say. Where did you live at the time of the LA riots?
So the riots happened, I want to say, I don't know the exact date, but it was definitely the early 90s, or pretty early.
May of 1992.
1992, okay. My memory's not awful. So May of 1992, I was living in New Jersey, Hawthorne, New Jersey, my parents' house. I was a senior May of 1992, I was ending my junior year in high school.
Were there riots in New Jersey too? Like smaller protests, or was it just LA?
So I don't remember specifically, but I do remember hearing, it was like very early days of the internet. I mean, I didn't even own a computer. There was no computer in my house at the time. So what we relied on for news and information came like on a schedule. You'd get the newspaper in the morning. My father would get the evening edition of the newspaper sometimes and bring that home. Mm-hmm. We would read that. Would have like updated stories. And then of course you had television. So, you didn't even, I want to say they had CNN at the time. So they had like a 24 hours news network, but we weren't glued to it. It was a very pretty common thing to go an entire day or two, especially at my age, without really knowing anything. So, I don't remember seeing anything about riots in other places, but I do vaguely remember hearing rumors, hearing stuff that, that people were rioting in Newark, that, somebody got carjacked in Patterson, in the more urban areas around here. I don't remember, anything factual, but I remember having the sense that the riots, which, when they were going on in Los Angeles, which was on the news quite a bit, that was, a bigger thing. It wasn't. We had the feeling that it wasn't just, kind of going to happen in LA and that was going to be the end of it. like you just had a feeling that it was a bigger thing.
There wasn't a walkout at your school or anything?
No, not. I mean, again, I didn't go to a very. My school was diverse, but not in the like. There wasn't a lot of African Americans in my school. There was a pretty high Muslim population in my school, and a pretty high Hispanic population, and there was no, there was no sense or general outrage that was really kind of, dominating the day. It was a different time. We were 17, and we were aware of what was going on, but we were much more worried about our own lives.
Yeah. Did you watch the videotape of Rodney King getting beaten up?
I watched what was on the news.
And that was the famous one on the grainy recording.
Yeah, if I remember right, I want to say somebody. I mean, it wasn't a cell phone. Obviously, it was like somebody had a camcorder, which was like the side. Yeah, I mean those things were, relatively large back then. I mean they had gone beyond. They had gotten better from like being the kind that you carried on your shoulder with the VCR tape. They had gotten smaller, but they were still pretty uncommon. It was pretty uncommon for someone to have one on them just randomly, but apparently someone did, and it definitely was like a VHS recording because you could tell just by the like you said, the grainy aspect of it. And it was the news, so it wasn't different than what the news does now. They didn't show you an unedited tape from the beginning of the incident all the way to the end. The news would just show you, like not a sound bite, but a video bite, like a clip of this man, on the ground being beat by a number of police officers with their nightsticks, things like that, and he kept trying to get up, and they kept beating him. That's what I remember.
What did you think of the video? Were you skeptical of it? Did you?
Well, at the time, listen, for me personally, like, I'm always, even when I was younger, I was always a little mistrustful of information that they give you on TV because it's television. It's like I said, they give you like a small piece of it. But from what I saw, if I had to judge it on that, I mean, it seemed awful. It seemed like this poor guy was just getting beat. Now, we knew that he was, from what we remember on the news telling us anyway, we knew that this guy was resisting arrest. He had led them on a chase. He, was high on, I think maybe it was PCP or some kind of drug that really, kind of made you, lose touch with reality. But at the end of the day, even as a 17-year-old kid who, grew up on a different side of the country in a very different world than what I'm sure, Los Angeles was like at the time, especially in, like the more, poverty-stricken areas. I didn't have any basis for understanding that, but I still, watching that, I knew, or I shouldn't say I knew, but it just seemed crazy to me that they didn't just handcuff this guy, because clearly they could, with the manpower they had, they could have just handcuffed him and, zip tie. Well, I don't know if they had zip ties back then, but, somehow put a couple pairs of handcuffs on his legs and be done with it. It didn't make sense to me that they just continually beat this guy.
Do you think that the police who did it should have been acquitted?
I don't remember what they were brought up on charges of or what the charge was. If it was just basic police brutality, I don't really know whether they should have been acquitted or not. But based on the little bit that I saw, it didn't seem like that was normal, that they should have treated this person like this, regardless of what he had done.
Do you think some people like the Civil Rights Organization, like a lot of those, like NAACP and stuff, have said that have been reluctant to call it the LA riots and have called it the LA uprising instead? Do you think that's a fair characterization? I
don't.
Why is that?
Because I don't think you can justify violence, as an answer for injustice. I just think that begets more violence that pushes people apart. When you start talking about a group of people who feel like they've been mistreated for generation after generation, that's something that's real. That's something that if that's how people feel, that's reality. But you can't use extreme violence, destruction, because people died. A lot of people died in those riots. A lot of people's personal property was destroyed. People built lives around their businesses and around these kind of things, and it was all taken away from them. So I don't think calling it an uprising, or a some kind of seminal moment in civil rights history. I think the real true civil rights leaders in this country would, obviously the one you think of more than any is Dr. King. He would have been, I don't want to speak for the guy, but probably would have been extremely disappointed in that kind of reaction, because that is something that, he never was interested in, never interested in, violent reactions to, any injustice.
Do you think, after the riots or after the videotape, was there a concerted effort to not defund the police, but kind of a shifting attitude towards law enforcement?
Well, listen, there was. I don't think it was a result of that, but I think that made a lot more people aware of this feeling that a lot of people who grew up in the inner city had towards police. At the time there was, a lot of music and films about life, in Los Angeles, about life in the inner city in Los Angeles. I can think of two examples right away. I think of NWA, which was the rap band, and they had a song called, I can't swear on this, so I'll say F the Police.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and as that was when I was a freshman in high school. I remember that album coming out, and again, I grew up in a pretty I want to say not a diverse area, but not diverse in terms of African Americans. So we were all into rap anyway. It was new, relatively new. And, like the idea of saying that about the police was so like crazy to me, even though, truth be told, as a kid, I had some run-ins with the police, and, they would chase us. We would throw eggs at cars, things like that. Mm-hmm. But we never felt that anger towards them. There was movies too, like Boys in the Hood, which came out, I think it came out after the riots, to be honest with you, if I remember right. I think I was a senior. But again, to try and answer your question, I think that kind of feeling has been around for a very long time, between, especially inner city people and the police. Is it justified? Is there some movement to defund them back then? No, but there was definitely anger and, definitely a lot of disagreement over, people, feeling like they were mistreated. And the other way too, I'm sure the police officers, if you look at some of the movies back then, they try, to me anyway, like there was a movie called Colors, which came out in the late 80s about policing in the inner city. And I think it tried to give a portrayal of both sides of the argument. I don't think you see that now. I think now it's more one-sided, which is, not going to help solve anything.
Mm-hmm.
The LA riots led to an increased resentment in black communities among police enforcement. And how these attitudes were not limited to black communities, however. It had now broken into the mainstream, and many people who identified as left of center held negative attitudes towards police. This was exacerbated with the 1994 crime bill that cracked down on crime by beefing up law enforcement, particularly in major cities like New York. These attitudes towards police officers are still seen today, with many movements such as the Black Lives Matter movement calling for the defunding of police officers. Rodney King's situation is eerily similar to the situation of George Floyd that we see today. A short video that most Americans object to. However, we can learn a thing or two from Rodney King's situation. The officers were acquitted, and riots broke out and were some of the deadliest in American history. Now, with Derek Chauvin on trial, and deliberations being had this week. Let's just hope that we can learn from history so we are not doomed to repeat it.